Okay, so really quick here. So we're looking at the Vermont Grazing Plan. You guys can fill out your own name and address and all that stuff. Make sure you put a grazing planner in. So anyone who's been helping you, because if you forget to get your paperwork in at the end of the season, the state will call your grazing planner to remind you to put your paperwork in, because that does happen sometimes.
And I'm for the grazing planner. Who's in the room that right now who's the grazing planner? Raise your hand. Okay, so see them, look around, raise your hand big and high. Grazing planners. Okay, these are your peeps if you need somebody.
Okay, if you go into here, there's a really great intro that we wrote and explains like each section of the sheet. And we put a full example in here for you guys. This is just an example, right? Everyone's farm is different. And I think the best way to plan for something is plan for the worst case scenario. As farmers, it's gonna rain when we don't want it to, and it's gonna be dry when we don't want it to be. And it's really important that you don't overestimate what you have, right? Don't overvalue the grass you have, because it might not be as good as you think it is. And it's way better to assume you have less grass than you have. So that's my general assumptions when I go into anyone's farm, including my own, because the last thing you want to do is raise yourself into the circle of death in early September, right? Or late August. So I'm just going to start filling this out. Would anyone like to volunteer and we can run the numbers for one grazing group? This is not every group on your farm. This is one grazing group. Someone wants to give me the numbers. I'm happy to put them in here and we can actually do some math.
I'm gonna fill this out for you.
I'm gonna fill this out for you. Okay.
Volunteers tribute.
All right, volunteers tribute. Okay, so bring your chair over and we're gonna go, you guys can watch this happen. Okay, in real time. So what type of livestock do you have?
I had cow.
Okay, and is this cow calf pairs?
Mostly.
Mostly. We're gonna average because it's really hard to put different classes of animals. We try to figure out a worksheet to make for you guys who run sheep and cows in the same group, but it's really hard. So we almost have to run this through the math for two separate groups and then we add them together. Okay, average weight of your cow and your calf in the pair. So good question. So we asked what time of year. We're gonna just average it for the middle of the summer. So July 15th, what's the average weight of your cow?
For the cow calf pair, it's falling 1,400 pounds.
Okay, that's very common. And actually look at the side here. See, there's helpful suggestions, 1,400 pounds. Let me just make sure this actually works. Okay, good. Okay. So I know that the dry matter demand is 3%, but it also gives you suggestion over here. So there are tables, and if you click on these, or you click on the table tab at the bottom here, can you guys see what I'm doing? There's a table tab, and on the table tab, it has dry matter intake averages, like the average weight. So if you're a person who is your first year with sheep and you don't know, this is an average. It's not going to be perfect, and every breed is a little bit different, right? There's also pasture production averages. There's grazing utilization averages, which has to do with how often you move your animals and how long your rest period is. There's supplemental feed averages. So if you're feeding grain, what's the percentage of dry matter in that grain? And then there's also rest period averages when there's average precipitation, which we haven't had for some time. We got 42 pounds on average for dry matter intake for 1 pair. How many pairs do you have in here?
You're gonna have 13 calf pairs, actually
Okay.
something like 12 calf pairs.
12. And is there any other animals in the group?
Yeah, just a little bit, two-year-old heifers
Okay.
and one steer and one bull.
Okay, so 4 extra animals?
Yeah.
All right, let's just average them as 3. So you said 12 pairs plus, we're gonna say 3 animals, even though it's 4, because they're not quite as heavy as a cow calf pair.
Yeah.
The bull is heavier, but bulls eat a lot lower percentage of body weight. We can pretend that a 2,000 pound bull is only like 1,200 pounds because they eat, unless they're a growing bull. I'm going to put in 15 animals here. And you can just do this mentally, right? Whatever the unit is. The unit in this case is 1,400 pounds. So if you have 2 additional feeders in there and they're 800 pounds each, it's like close enough. Those 2 feeders are like equal to 1 1,400 pound calf cow pair. It's just a weight. It's just a weight math thing. Is anyone freaking out right now? Okay. All right. So that's 630 pounds per day. I feel weird with this. I feel like bizarre. Anyways, okay. Do you feed anything besides mineral, which doesn't count, like hay, haylage, grain to those animals? Okay. So 0 supplemental feed. I'm just going to put this in pretend for a second. If you were a dairy farmer and you were feeding let's just say 10 pounds of grain each per cow per day. Bam, it does the math for you. 10 pounds of grain is worth 9.1 pounds of dry matter, multiplies by the 15 units, and it gives you 137 pounds, which then down here under group demand, it minuses from the group demand, okay? But he doesn't feed anything and mineral does not count. Okay, so you can see here's the dry matter demand, and you can see that he feeds 0, so he still has the same dry matter demand. Then you go down to pasture rotation. Look at the examples on the sides here. This is where everyone freaks out. So we have here 800 pounds is the production. It's not actually what the cows are eating, right? Because they're crapping, stepping, and there's stems, right? There's some amount growing, and then we're going to put the utilization in, and that's what they're actually eating is going to be what this number is down here in this box. So is this an average pasture?
Yeah, I call it average.
Okay, so let's put 1,100 pounds. We'll put it slightly below average. See how average is 12? You don't have to pick just one of these numbers. You can put any number you want in here, right? See if you can make it a little bit bigger. You do it. Sure.
Upside on the box.
Note, if you're like raising a pasture that hasn't been grazed in 8 years, you're not even going to be poor, which is 800 pounds. You're going to be like 400 pounds. So that's something to remember here. Or we do have an exceptional category. We do have an exceptional category, and exceptional categories are probably not you. I'm really sorry, but like everyone thinks they're a great driver. Most people are crappy drivers. And so like everyone does not have an above average pasture. Most of you have probably an average pasture, below average pasture. To have an exceptional pasture, we're talking like a level, very good soil, basically a hay field that you graze once or twice a year that's also fertilized, either once or more times per year. If you have an incredibly well-fertilized, managed, perfect soil type, you have a soil of, what is it called? A soil of, you guys remember the term, what's the state use? Distinction.
Oh, yes.
Does anyone here have a soil of distinction?
It was like not used for years.
Okay, and I don't mean this means distinction. So anyways, what I'm saying is probably your pasture not as good as you think it is. Also, make sure you measure your pasture like on Google Earth. Don't just go by what your town records say, because fields shrink over time as trees grow in. So if you think you have a 50-acre field, it's probably 35 acres. That's also a problem. Anyways, okay, back to utilization. This says here, do not exceed 75% in your own calculations, because cows have to walk and poop and step. And so they're not going to eat 100% of the 1,100 pounds that's growing there, because they're not a machine, okay? Also, we want to leave 4 inches of residual. So, here, I'm just going to put in 70%, because that's like daily moves. How often are you moving? Okay. Now we might get in here and you might be like, actually, I'm doing better than that. So we can also figure that out. This is where you're really talking to yourself or a farmer, if you're a planner, to figure out, I turned my phone on. Does anyone have a calculator? Okay, well, we need one in a minute, maybe. Okay, so right here, this has this demand. I'm going to put in here 0.5 because he moves his animals twice a day. Is that right? Most days. Okay. So that means that for his occupancy here, it takes like your dry matter of what you need, divides it by what you think you have, and it gives you then the acres per day that you feed. And so he needs 0.8 acres per day. And this calculates the whole thing for you. So you're just paying attention to the tables and putting stuff in. It's not so bad. And if you're super excited about the math and you love it, which is great, then you can mess around with your numbers and be like, ooh, I can add a cow pair to this group. Or I'm way over, maybe I can graze this other field. So anyways, you're gonna come up with 0.4. That means you're moving every 12 hours, 0.4 acres. So down here, this is the pasture
The
calculator.
way I do it is a little weird. So it's like, I usually go out, like say 6 a.m.
Sure.
I'm actually not excluding them from the backside. I'm just
Sure.
opening up.
Yep. So
Chunk.
you're just essentially like opening a new area and they're back racing for half a day where they were before. That's fine. When did they get excluded completely from where they were on Monday?
Good 24 hours.
Okay. For available acres. So right here, let's just look at this chart really quick. So these are average rest periods. 20 days is a very short rest period. My guess is that most people don't have this unless you start early in May and get a lot of rainfall. We've had very dry Mays. So you can actually change this to 25 days. You can change all of these up here. Please don't go less than 20 days. It's really this is probably more like what we have. I know he's in Peachum, so I know this is probably a little more accurate for him. So I just adjusted the rest period. Down the line here, you can see in May, he needs 25 days of rest, 0.4 acre paddocks because he's moving every 12 hours. He needs 51 paddocks and he needs about 20 acres. It really calculates this for you. And if you look at each box, you can actually click on it and it'll tell you how the calculation is made in case you're like, what is happening? So it'll actually give you the kind of the math on the side, which is nice. It's not like there's invisible math happening. Down here in the acres available, how many acres are you using for your beef most of the time?
For this main herd for this area.
So all summer you use the same pasture. Okay, so this is what happens when you put that in. So either we have a calculation issue or when do you run out of grass? Early October?
And also herd is bigger now than it was last year too, so I'm actually in the process of fencing it here more.
Okay. So that's a really great point. Like his herd is, in the past, if this has been big enough for his herd has been smaller, you can see how maybe you have too many animals this year for that pasture, or because you're fencing in additional acres, you're good. Sometimes we've changed, a number is not as accurate as we think it is. So we could go back here and you said you had soil of distinction. Perhaps you're closer to 1,200 pounds. So we can adjust things if we feel like this calculation is slightly off. But if we go back down here, you can see that you're still short. Usually when you're short, like a small amount like this, you don't see it for a whole month because you're just like speeding up your rotation a little at a time. What are the additional acres you're hoping to fence in? Do you know how many acres that is? Oh, okay, so 15 additional acres. Okay, but that's okay. So if it's 15 additional acres, it's like the equivalent of adding, maybe you could say it's worth half what these acres are worth. You could just add 7. This could be like 28. If the acres he's adding in are worth half of what the ones he has is, then we now can see that he's not going to be really getting low until August, and he's only short 2 acres. This is when I start killing beef.
I have another 10-acre pasture, but I don't usually want to move this herd through there.
Totally.
What if you have a hay field that you then graze? When you added it?
So he just said he had an additional 10 acres that it's in an orchard that he can graze. I would add it in August because you can see that you have a deficit here. Or halfway through August, maybe first part of August, you're okay. Usually it's important to add or kill animals or move animals or sell them like before you get to the deficit.
Yeah, actually, just really wide.
Okay,
So you think about this.
This chart is fine for this kind of thing, right? This is so you can get your payment and you can see right at the bat where you're at. The problem is that you cannot change, like if your stocking rate changes if he's butchering, you said 3 animals,
Yeah, 1 in July.
1 in July, and in August. Okay, so he's only losing 1, which is not a very big deal. But this kind of tells you that he's going to need to add those 10 acres or maybe just 5 of those acres in about August. So it could be actually a little earlier if we have a drought. Let's see. So
My plan was to do it all in May, so I feel like now I have an urgency to do it.
this is actually good. This is why we do grazing planning before the season starts. So look here. So if we add in only 5 acres of the 10 additional acres for orchard, that now you don't have a problem till September. And if you look at the top of the sheet, it says 45 days. 45 days from September 1st is October 15th. So essentially, if he doesn't want to add any extra additional acres in to graze past October 15th, that's fine. However, like one thing Troy was saying is that, and I think other people have been talking about a lot today, is obviously the longer you can graze, the more money you're probably going to make because feeding hay is expensive. We do have this an additional box here, which is basically like a 60-day. This is like people who want to graze until January 1st or end of December. You can see that substantially more acres here. He would have, let's see, what did we say? It was 10 extra acres. So you would have 38 acres, which is probably maybe like November 15th or something. It really depends on the season, right? So just like guessing.
I feel like something isn't right here.
So that could be right. And so like we could go back here and look at this. How many cows did you have in your original paddock of 21 acres last year?
Cow pairs and 4 pairs plus 4 mature cows plus the middle.
Okay, so 4 pairs plus, you said 8? Or 4 pairs?
4 pairs plus 4 matures.
Oh, okay. So 8 plus the bull and a steer? Okay, so that's 8, 9. Let's just look at your numbers from last year so we can guess where you're at. The numbers from last year was basically, let's put it in as 9. So 9 animals. We look down at the chart. You can see that with 9 animals from last year, you had exactly enough acreage because you have 21 acres, and in September you needed 20.9. Did everyone follow that? I just changed the numbers when you had last year to see if this chart was off. The truth is that you just have a lot more animals, but you do have the acreage to deal with it. Or you can always sell or butcher animals. One thing I think about in Vermont a lot is, you know how on Groundhog Day you have to have half your wood left to get to the end of winter? You're burning wood. Like July 1st, you really need twice as much pasture as you needed on May 1st to finish grazing for the season. It's not perfect, but a rule of thumb, which is like not what anyone wants to do. Okay. So that was good. Now you can make decisions about what you need to do. You could copy this. I don't know if I want to try this. This isn't my computer, but one thing we can do is, I can do this over the phone with you later. I want to do another example. I'll leave this group here actually. So let me put this in as, what was it, 16 and we have in here or 14? 13?
I'm sorry,
For this year, it's 13.
Yeah, 12.
If you wanted to save that on my computer, put his name on it and then.
Okay.
Like, save it at.
Okay, actually, I'm just gonna put him on grazing group 1, and I'm just gonna do 3 groups today. How's that sound? And each one we can save the spreadsheet and send you a copy. Okay, what is the name of your farm? All right, who's next? Thank you. Sure.
You are gonna be a big change like in June, right?
So usually with a big change like that, I would actually put it in as group 1 and 2. I'd run like the bottom tab, you have 3 group options. If your group is, say you're running feeders, this is really hard to do with feeders. But say you're running a feeder group and you're butchering like half of your mature stock on like July 1st. So you can either run the numbers with that's the amount you think you're gonna have later in the season. Because that is when it's really important, right? Because the grazing numbers for later in the season are a lot more important than early because we always have too much grass in May and June and we never have enough grass later. So that would be my recommendation is you go with the number that you're gonna have like in the later part of the summer. Or you just put it as 2 separate groups and then up here in the notes, you actually make a note about what you're doing. And you explain that. Those of you who might be short on pasture for some reason with the group that you have, you can always write in the notes section, like, we're planning to butcher 3 animals in August, and I'm gonna feed 1 bale per week, starting like on July 31st, if that's your plan. But you have to have a plan. You can't just be overstocked, right, in order to get a payment from FAB. They are gonna come and do field checks. They don't do everyone, but you don't know who they're doing. So, you know, whatever your math says, they're still going to look at your grass later and be like, wow, this looks amazing, even if your math looks terrible or vice versa. But I can tell you if your math doesn't look good, they're more likely to come check on you. So anyways, I need an example of someone who has a small ruminant. So goat or sheep to go next. Sure, please.
Like in the later part of the summer, when the grazing period, or the recovery period is longer. Than
Yeah.
You're still 40 period, definitely going into the next month.
Exactly.
How is that accountable?
So that's the problem with these kind of spreadsheets, in my opinion, is that it limits your ability to be super precise, which is why I like to use a grazing chart, like for a real grazing plan. Like this is great to guesstimate your stocking rate and how many acres you need, and also to apply for NRCS or state programs, you need to do this. However, to figure out if you need to do a third cutting or not cut, or you have to cut by like July 27th, you need to actually do a daily, this is like a day-by-day plan, right? And this is where you're like, oh crap, there's 5 days in July that like this field isn't ready. I can't cross my cows across this road because it's the 4th of July and there's a parade. Like stuff like that happens, right? And so where you're like, I'm going on vacation with my family in August for a week because preschool is closed or whatever. And I need to put my animals in a secure location so that my farm sitter isn't insane. So that's why like a chart like that's really good for a real plan. This is good though, to tell you how many acres, like it does seem to work really well for telling you how many acres you do need to survive that kind of rest period. So let me just go into in the chart right here. So say that you have sheep or goats and it's a normal rainy season. you're gonna wanna put 60 days across this entire thing, which kind of sucks because your grass is gonna be over mature unless you're haying. You're also gonna need a lot more land than the grass says, because the grass is gonna be ready and you're not gonna be able to graze it because you're gonna get worms. So a lot of people don't do this, and then they worm a lot when they lose animals. And it's funny because like even, so I actually put here, when we did this sheet, we put 45 days minimum. It's really preferably 60 days or more. If it's really dry, honestly, 30 days is probably fine. Like if it's literally a drought. But unless it's actually a drought and there's not hardly any ground moisture, those larvae are hatching. Even if you, one more thing is, even if you're like, my sheep only graze at the very top, they don't. When you tell them not to, they're like eating all the way down in some places and not others. Go ahead.
We reorganize our herd during breeding season.
Sure,
We have normally a main herd and then the bull and a companion are
sure.
whiling away the time. And so when we reorganize them, we have different numbers of animals. We now have really two big herds and they're the same. Those cow, calf, the bull, and then the yearlings and the 2-year-olds. I've actually done this already and I found it helpful, but I ended up calling it 4 different groups.
Yeah, so the group thing is complicated. Do you want to go through a group right now? Or do you feel like you don't?
I don't know how to deal with it. Also, we hay.
Right,
So during the end of the season, when things are slower, we
Yeah.
have a lot more acres. And also we send 2 to the butcher a month. So the big guys from the market herd,
right,
the weight of the market herd shrinks pretty fast down to the end.
which is perfect, because that's what the grass
The
is.
yearlings,
Right,
just the yearlings and the 2-year-olds are
Right.
gone. So it looks like, when I run the numbers, it looks like, oh my gosh, this is awful. But actually it's not, because how do we account for those 2 going? I know that on the last tab is a records one, and
Yep.
they do ask you
Mhm.
to put the number that are going,
Yep,
but I don't know how to reflect what actually happens. This
Right.
can't possibly reflect everything.
no, and that's what, like, we basically.
So the notes,
Right, so I would put it in the notes, but I would also pick like a later season number. Because the grass in Vermont is like a lot and then it peters out. The problem is that you're also gonna have calves that are growing substantially, right? They could be putting on 2 pounds per day and grow substantially during the grazing season. And so we're at opposite ends, right? Our needs are increasing when the grass is decreasing. So like butchering to make up for that is a really sound plan. It is hard if there are different groups to show that this group actually isn't running out of grass. So what I would say is I would actually do your numbers like it's August. So you know how many animals you're going to take out by August 1st. Run that number and put that in your notes. Say that we're actually going to start the year with 16 feeders or whatever. And we're gonna start out with 16, but I'm only going to put 10 on the sheet because there's going to be 6 that are gone before August 1st. You can also put it in what is actually happening. On May 1st, you have 16 in that group. And then you can make a note that just says that we changed around the number and we see that you're gonna have plenty of grass because you ran the sheet with 7, which is what we're gonna have in September. We know it works. Those cows are all gonna be gone. This is the problem. None of these sheets, you can't adjust the dryer intake of your group. You could actually pretend like it's 2 different groups. But I don't think it's worth doing that. And I also think like the people who are looking over these grazing plans are very reasonable. They're not gonna be like, this person said they had twice as, but they actually shrunk their group. That's fine. As long as you're not adding cows when the grass is less, but I would just make a note in there. Because like I said, people who have complex group, we tried to figure out how to make it so you could do the math for 3 types of classes in one group, but it would just make this whole thing outrageous. So we just try to keep it simple. So that's why if you have a calf that starts out at 100 pounds, but it ends up being 400 pounds in September, like just put it in like it's 400 pounds in May. It's okay. It's not perfect. That kind of makes sense.
and I'll make heavy use of the note setting.
Yes, make heavy use of the note section. We also, if you guys have suggestions and you're like an Excel wizard, please tell us, because there are some things that, this is a trial run. This sheet is not perfect. We want to make everything better. So let's fix it together. Every scenario you guys have is one we might not have thought of.
What about multi-species farm?
That's why, so with multi-species, so like you run sheep and cows together, there's really no way you could like average a cow. It's actually better to run them as grazing group 1 and 2 and say they're actually combined and then figure out how much acres they need separate, add them together. I do not believe like some grazing planners that cows and sheep are, like they say you can add 1 sheep for every 2 cows or something. I think that's crap.
So you should,
Do 2 separate ones and then, you know how much acreage you have. And you can put in the notes, like, we actually run group 1 and 2 together, but we did the math separately. I know. There's no sheet that does that. Sorry,
my sheep don't graze all the land that I graze.
I know, and your cows actually leave. So for you, it's actually easier because your sheep kind of are separate in the summer.
So I don't do leased land.
No, do the lease land. Anything that you control as a grazer counts.
All right.
Anyone else want to volunteer?
And there's some part of the street that like, so if the groups added together and like, to see that.
Yeah, so a little bit. If you look at the grazing, this section here will show you like your groups and it will show like the acres required for each of these groups. You can visually see them combined here, but they're not actually combined. They're still separated.
At no point do not get type based on an animal unit. Somebody.
Even people who have like really complex grazing groups, like sheep and cows, a lot of times they have like cow-calf pairs plus like they've got 4 or 5 yearlings and then they've got 20 sheep, but they also have some like wethers in there. And like by the time you get done, they have 5 classes of animals, which technically is like 5 different groups in one group. And so what we found, it was just like.
That's how you make a diversified livestock operation work.
Sure. And actually, like if I come to your farm, I can do the math on the back of an envelope like that for you, no problem, and tell you what your demands are. But it's very hard. We actually did make sheets like that, but the sheet got so big and it was so unwieldy that it was just like terrifying for grazing planners to go in there and be like, so we wanted to try to keep it simple, which I know is not perfect because you guys have complicated things happening. The other thing that's true, and this is something that if you think about carefully that doesn't work, is like in the case of you have a field you're adding in that's literally half of the production of another field. If you just put in the actual acres, it's very tricky because it might look like you have plenty of acres when you don't, because 50% of the new acreage that you're adding in August is actually worth less. Imagine the complications of having 8 different productions for every, that's why people, when you do this or something like this, you can actually adjust when you go into a field, you know that this field is really crappy. And so if you do the math and they are supposed to get half an acre per day, you can assume they actually need a whole acre per day in this field, but a half an acre in this field. So you can do it here so much easier. But remember, this is a tool to get you paid. So let's not overcomplicate.
It's not how you're gonna graze.
It's not necessarily how you're gonna graze, but like I will say, like it does a pretty good job of guessing total acreages here fairly accurately when we try it out with averages. Does anyone else, maybe we just do one more of these. I think I'm tired. I don't know about you guys. Let's pick one more. You guys want to do your sheep? Okay, I want to do a sheep example so that you guys can all see the difference here for sheep and goat people. Okay, so let's go to the top here. So I'm going to put it under use them. I want to see it's like 14. Okay, that's
Yeah.
okay, so your average weight was 150 pound ewe with, we'll say 2 30-pound lambs. Is that what you said? Oh, that's right. They don't twin. Let's put this in as 205. Okay, sheep are 4%. How many pairs? Or how many ewe lamb groups? 16. And then do you feed them anything besides mineral?
Not drinkers.
And then are these average fields or exceptional fields or crappy fields?
Average.
Can you move them every day? Every 2 days? 2
Every
days?
2 days.
2? And you said you had 14 acres?
Yeah, 14, so
So you guys can all see like what I'm doing here, like with the 60-day rotation, if these were cows, you would literally need half the amount of land, not half, but half earlier in the season. You wouldn't need 60-day rest until September or October. Sheep and goats are complicated, right? Because to avoid parasites, you're essentially overgrazing, overgrowing your grass. That was it. Really easy. I'm going to put
here than I.
Then you thought, good. I'm going to actually put this in as 3 squares. I have one more. Does anyone else want me to do theirs right now?
we want to do theirs because we're feeding other inputs.
Sure. Yep. Anyone else dying for one? No? Okay. Let's do the dairy. We're just put dairy square, and then we're done, you guys. I feel like
Although you
can all help me. I feel like I tortured you guys with failed grazing. Okay, small dairy cows. There's a small section, which is a lot bigger, different than Holsteins. Average pound, we said 1,000. Oh, no, you have one big one.
No, we have the brown stuff.
Let's just average your is 1,100 for all of them. So I put in 3.7%. You can see over here, this really does give you like health. So you're like, oh God, I don't know what percentage. Like according to what livestock class we select, it will give you like some options. Obviously, if your cows are making over 5% butter fat, this percentage can be 4% or higher. It's really awesome. So these are first calf dairy cows. So we're just going to assume they're not. Actually, you know what? I'll put them up a little higher because they might be less efficient. We're gonna put them at there's 3, right? Okay, now for feed, what are you feeding them in the barn? So how many pounds per day, do you have any idea? Of actual weight, not dry matter, just
Probably it's 25 to 50 pounds.
25 to 50. So how about 35?
Yeah.
Okay, and then how much grain?
But they also have dry.
Okay, so,
feeding.
so you know what, when like on May 1st or June 1st or whatever, like when, are you gonna feed any grain or no?
A little bit, starting in April.
Like,
Back.
like 4 pounds, 5?
Yeah.
35 pounds of baleage is a lot. Is that 20 pounds? That's okay. Let's just do it and see what happens. Okay. These are really good pastures, right?
The ones that are going to are.
Average. Okay. Like average or average? Okay, let's just say 700. All right, 70%. And then you move them every day. Okay. And then see what happens. See, they're not getting a lot of grass here. When you look at their, let's go back up. Their demand is 125, so they're only going to get a third of their demand from pasture. So you might want to back the field. 20. Let's try 20,
like 2%.
I need to get I hate using, my phone is off, I need a calculator, but that's okay. This is close enough. If you look here, if you're showing this here, if your demand is 125, this is a lot better. How many acres?
There are gonna be ones that depend on the month too, because we know that 2 of the fields, like the first slated, with 7 acres, have to go to the sheep in May, June.
So you guys have a lot of excess pasture, which means you can pay some of it. You
That's
could,
the crossover with the sheep.
right, totally. And you can still reduce your baleage somewhat so that you're getting closer to 75% off pasture. I'm just gonna save this and then you guys can mess around with it. So this is really helpful. Like if you're like organic and you're trying to figure out like, are you meeting your organic standard or not, then you can really use this to adjust things. Anyone else? I think we're done. Okay, I'm just gonna save this. Thank you, guys. For working on your percentage of dry matter, you would just get the individual dry matter of each cow, right, up here. So it's like 42 pounds. And then you figure out meat from pasture, and then you're not like certified organic, right? Don't take money, right? The less you're feeding, the better. Within reason. Okay, anyone else? Oh,
Quick question. Here you just demonstrate how you create group 4.
on here?
Yeah.
You can add a tab and copy all this, but the best thing to do is just use a separate whole grazing plan sheet. Because like, I usually copy the tab. You can just copy the tab. Do you actually do it on here?
Yeah, it's super easy.
Yeah, I think you can actually, how do I get this crap off the top?
Usually I just double click and every computer is different on how you double click, so don't ask me that. But you move or copy and then you just click whichever. If you filled this out before, you pick whichever one is closest to what you're going to replicate. Otherwise, just click one of them and change everything after. You would just click it and then it moves it. And obviously, so that you know what you're talking about. Instead of rename it, you just same thing. You could say like milkers or whatever.
Wait, did you take a group away?
It just said grazing group 3 and 4.
I think they're labeled. Yeah. If you have 6 grazing groups, you could literally just have 2 sheets that has 3 each. The one thing I would say is for your own mental health, try to have as few grazing groups as possible. Like multiple grazing groups is asking the question like, why do I have so many groups? And can I have fewer groups? Just because every group needs its own water, its own mineral, its own attention. And so combining groups as possible is good. I mean, within reason. Sweet.
Thanks, Amber.